I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Welcome to Tape 2 of Death or Glory, S.O.V. horror, that is shot on video horror. And yes, this is Tape 2, so if you're hearing that and you don't know what Tape 1 is, please go to episode 118, episode 118, and start there. We left Tape 1, we ejected it, and before we put in Tape 2, we did our due diligence, which means that we took some head cleaner and we put it on that cassette that you used to put in to clean the heads on your VCR. If anybody remembers this was fun. You basically just put a few drops of, I think, what was rubbing alcohol on felt. And you put that felt line through the heads and you cleaned it. And there was never a better feeling that perhaps you were doing something successful than if you'd find just a little bit of dirt or grime on that white strip as it came out. Anyway, we have done that due diligence and we are here at Tape 2. Now, why am I talking about shot on video and devoting two tapes to it? Well, one of the reasons is that I had not really talked a lot about shot on video, and I've neglected it. And quite honestly, it was the words of a friend, Aaron Abushan, who is one of the hosts of Discover the Horror, another great podcast. And he had talked to me about shot on video. I had mentioned something about a film, and he said, you know, what I love about shot on video is that you're going to see something that you would never see in a Hollywood film. And I completely agree on that. I also believe that you get a sense of a flavor of a place. They are very much regional filmmaking. You also get a taste of what the personality is of the people who are making it. Sometimes these movies show perhaps the phobias of the people who are making them, if there is such a thing as the auteur theory. I will say that the auteur theory certainly in spades works at shot on video level, because the people who are making these are usually the writers, the directors, the actors, the editors. They have a friend maybe who makes music. Sure, they still need other people to make the thing, but there's no doubting, no denying that this is straight off the cerebral cortex of one person that's getting this thing done, and it is their idea. And if you watch some of these movies, we'll be talking about some filmmakers here who make more than one shot on video, and you start to watch them and you start to see a pattern. You see some things perhaps those folks don't necessarily want you to see. But the thing that I love about it is that shot on video is probably another thing, the missing link perhaps when people poo-poo that horror is the punk rock of cinema. And if there's any sign that it would be the punk rock of cinema, it's mainly because it is so grassroots. It is done by the fans directly. A lot of times, whoever was in the audience at a punk show were the people who became the next band that was going to be up. And I think the same thing happens with movies. When you start seeing something like Sam Raimi doing The Evil Dead, which I think the first name of it was Book of the Dead before it was called The Evil Dead. And at that time, when that movie hits, there are a few other films that start being made up there. And so you have a movie like The Carrier from 1987, really strange movie. And you have a movie like Frostbiter, which is Curse of the Wendigo. What I mean is that there are people who kind of pave the way in an area, and overnight you start seeing a budding movie community. And a lot of times these end up being shot on video because there is no studio. You may be in the middle of nowhere and you're not going to have the ability to go into a city. You may not be able to rent this equipment. Perhaps you're just going to do it on the cuff. And that is where this is very much like punk rock. You don't wait until you have everything together. Just do it. If you want to do it, you can do it. So the idea that there is very little, there's no velvet rope in horror. There is no difference between the stage and the audience. And there is this idea that it can be regional, kind of like when bands went across country, bands like DOA and Black Flag, wherever they played, bands started to sprout up in those areas. And I think that same thing happens in the regional cinema that comes out of shot on video. Shot on video allows people to be able to speak without having to have that huge budget. And really, I think its time has come as well. And I think shot on video is starting to have a little bit of a resurgence in certain areas of the horror community because we are very inured by that look now. We're used to it. We watch TikTok, Instagram, you have Threads, but really YouTube. When we look at what's on YouTube, there is a huge variety of levels of craftsmanship that go in there, or tightness, professionalism, and it doesn't seem to matter. You don't necessarily have to be there at the high levels of production. What you need to do is have something exciting to say that connects with an audience. And that's usually something that people don't even know that they're looking for. And that's what I think happens with shot on video. So we're going to talk a little bit about these punk rock wonders. And let's just jump right in. So today, I want to start our travelogue in St. Louis, Missouri. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the auteur of shot on video from that area, Eric Stanze. And Eric Stanze's name is well known in the shot on video world. He's somewhat legendary because he's been doing it for about 30 years. And what's really intriguing about Eric is that many of his movies, there's so much diversity in what he decides to do. He has movies that can be like huge magnum opuses, or as big of a magnum opus as you can get with the change that you can find at the bottom of your couch cushion. And then there can be deeply personal, very small movies with one or two characters. It's really intriguing. And what I think is really interesting about his work, not only does he not seem to repeat himself that often, there's a lot of style in what he's doing, and those styles can be somewhat different too. He may go heavy on gore in some spots. He may go psychological in another. But I think the thing that most interests me in Eric's movies is that he has all of the same kind of limitations that anyone else has in shot to video movies. And that is, the props may not be that great. There may be an economy of shots at certain points because, hey, you're running out of money. The actors are well-meaning people who are really trying their best. They may be going above and beyond what their abilities allow them to. The dialogue may be a little bit heavy in certain spots to pad things. There may be padding of people walking a lot. That tends to happen a lot in shot on video. But with all of that happening, there's something that comes through in Eric's movies, and that is a authenticity. The authenticity that I think is super hard to get is authenticity of the actors. That there's just a moment where the dialogue clicks, the people interacting click, the chemistry's there, whatever it is, there are moments of humanity that I don't expect to see. You assume many times when you're watching these movies that you're going to get rudimentary characterizations. And what I think is really interesting about Eric's work is that just when you think you know what's going to happen, that it's going to be rather cookie cutter, you find out it's not at all. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about two of Eric's movies. The first one is his first movie, his first full-length movie shot on video called Savage Harvest. We're going to hop, skip, and jump 6 years in the future, and we're going to talk about Scrapbook. Savage Harvest and Scrapbook are two really different types of movies. But I think you'll see that there's an interesting thread that goes through Eric's work. And I will say that these two movies are impressive in their very unique ways. So let's start with Savage Harvest, which of all of Eric Stanze's films, this is probably the most, shall we say, mainstream of his movies. And when I mean mainstream, I mean that structurally, this is probably the most straightforward of a horror movie of anything that he's done. This is a movie where you have 6 teenagers essentially go out in the woods, find themselves in a place they shouldn't be. There's a curse, and in that curse, my goodness, they start turning into demons. So very much like movies such as Evil Dead, the influence of Evil Dead, the influence of Night of the Demons is there, the movie Demons itself. All 3 of those movies have kind of the same idea that there is in Savage Harvest, which is you can catch being a demon, you can catch being possessed. And so people get scratched, or they're just in the vicinity of something that's happening, and boom, they can turn into these big fanged demons. The thing that's interesting about this movie, or a little bit of a twist on that, is that Eric Stanze brings the Trail of Tears, the genocide of Native Americans across the country, kicking and screaming into this story. So they're on Cherokee land, and this Cherokee land has a past. We hear about it from the uncle of one of the teenagers who happens to be there, being the curator of this spot. And he tells a rather long story of exposition about, and it's a little bit confusing. It's not necessarily the high point of the movie, trying to decipher what is actually happening here. There's a wise man that's there, the shaman of the tribe, decides to conjure up this beast to defend the Cherokee from what's happening on the Trail of Tears, and it's a huge demon, and it doesn't necessarily go well. We find out that there are these stones that have all of these inscriptions on them. They're carvings, so there'll be carvings of a hand, there'll be carvings of a wolf, there'll be carvings of a human being's form. And these all have a certain power to conjure up this creature again. Now, he was, from what I get, if I can remember correctly, the wise man, the shaman, is killed by the rest of the tribe because of this terrible thing that's happening, therefore cursing this land. The land is also cursed by the Trail of Tears itself. And this demon lies in waiting, and it will not show until there is more Cherokee blood in that vicinity. And when there is Cherokee blood, my goodness, this thing's going to rise up, and it's going to take over this person, and they're just going to go on a wild killing spree. Well, we start getting some of that in this movie. Now, what I think is really intriguing is that this is a first effort. I believe Eric Stanze was 23 when he made this movie. And there's a lot of assuredness to the filmmaking. It's very efficient in how it does the shots. There's a lot of action that's going on. There are many different characters. The special effects look really good for the amount of money that's there. It's a super low budget movie, and it certainly doesn't feel like it's a first effort. It feels like someone who's been around for a while that knows how to put a movie together. So even though there are some clumsy moments in it, that really does sing. This is a movie that has some really great gore, some really great kills. It is what a gore hound would want, and it does feel very much like a horror movie that you would expect from the 80s. What I think really works well in this movie is something that's not really the special effects at all. It kind of takes its time getting to the point where all the madness is going to happen. And the setup is these friends are heading out to this woodlands, and one of the girls that is involved in this group has a really shitty boyfriend. What we hear is that he's a really shitty boyfriend, and the group has not asked him to come along. They've kept him out of the loop, and they're trying to give this girl a good weekend and to, be an open ear to be able to talk about this guy. But what ends up happening is this boyfriend ends up getting to the place before them. He finds out from someone else where they're going, gets the directions. It's not hard for him. him, and he decides he's going to try and mend fences. So normally in a movie like this, you're going to have this guy be the dick of dicks, right? He's not supposed to be there. They've already set up that he's an asshole, that the girlfriend does not like him. I believe she's the sister of one of the other girls. So there's all this stuff where you get a real bias against this guy, and then you see him, and he's there talking to the uncle, because the uncle is on the land and he's waiting for the kids to show up. And the thing is, he comes and he's really nice. And him and the uncle have a very leisurely and very authentic conversation. It doesn't feel very forced. It feels like they're really kind of getting to know each other, and they're passing the time. And I'm thinking, watching this, like, there's going to be a real, boy, this guy is just manipulative. He comes out here and he's playing to get on the favors of the uncle and all this. And no, he's actually a seemingly nice guy who really wants to fix things up. Now he's going to fuck up. He's going to fuck things up again. But he's sincerely trying to repair things with this girlfriend. And so when we first see the other teenagers show up, they're not very happy to see that he's there. And what ends up happening is he goes from being this awkward character to one of the key characters that does heroic acts. So it's an interesting spin. But what's really interesting is seeing these characters that should be kind of throwaway. You are interested in them. They're not great actors. Some of the acting is very amateurish. Yet there are moments when I feel that it does land in kind of this authentic thing, that they finally get the rhythm. And I have to admit that I thought that that was one of the things that made this movie really strong. You can watch it for all the gore effects. They're certainly there. But it's interesting to watch someone who is working on a very low budget, not just go for the action, to actually spend some time with the characters, allowing the characters to be a little bit more different than what you would normally feel and see in a movie like this. And I think that that speaks to what makes his later films really provocative. Savage Harvest could have very easily just been a gore fest with cardboard cutout characters, and it would have been just fine, right? You'd still be marveling at the fact that he put so much energy into this movie for the low budget that it is, how good it looks. But it goes one step further, and it adds this really interesting piece about human interaction that is somewhat rudimentary in this film, but it certainly does pay off in others. And that brings me to Scrapbook. Now, where Savage Harvest is probably Eric Stanze's most mainstream movie, I would say that Scrapbook is decidedly not mainstream. This is extreme cinema. This is something that is up there with August Underground, which there are certain similarities in aesthetics. So there is a big difference. There's a big difference in tone. As gory as Savage Harvest is, there's still a sense of 80s horror movie, monster movie fun. Scrapbook, on the other hand, is a dark movie with a dark meditation in the center of it, where you had multiple people in Savage Harvest, a cast of at least a dozen people. Scrapbook itself is a two-person film, two characters, set in one location. And it is terribly suspenseful in certain ways. In the story of Scrapbook, it's about a serial killer named Leonard who takes a woman named Clara hostage. She's his newest victim. And we get the idea that he's been killing for a long time and somehow undetected. We get to see his modus operandi through the eyes of Clara. And he doesn't just kill people. He doesn't kill the women immediately. He holds on to them as hostages. He holds on to them as toys. There is mental, psychological torture. There is physical torture. There is sexual torture. It is a tough film, to say the least. And the thing that's the most interesting and where the name comes from is that Leonard doesn't just want to treat them like meat. Another way that he breaks them down is he has them write in his scrapbook their story, what they're going through. He takes Polaroids and puts them in there. So he is holding on to their entire essence long after they're dead. He can go back like serial killers tend to do, holding trophies. The trophy is the entirety of their last few days living. And that's some rough going when you think about that. Because most of the time when you hear about serial killers, you hear the thing of try and get your name in front of him. You know, all of these things that you try to do to give that person an identity, the victim an identity, so that they're not killed. Give some humanity to them. He devours the humanity. He wants to have that humanity. So it is, as I mentioned before, rough going. There's very graphic violence in the movie. There's graphic sex in the movie, although it's not pornography per se. It comes very, very riskily close. How close? Well, the movie that people normally talk about as being really at the edge of being too extreme is a Serbian film. Now, a Serbian film had, I believe, 4 minutes cut from it when it went up in front of the British censor board, one of the most notorious boards out there. When SCRAPBOOK went up, it had 15 minutes cut. So you get an idea of what the uncut version of SCRAPBOOK is. What's interesting as well is that, like August Underground, one of the reasons that I like August Underground as well is the character of the killer. There's not a lot of charisma. It's just a dumpy kid, a farm boy in Pennsylvania somewhere that is stricken with ennui, a life that is going nowhere. Violence and sadism grows. And you get the same kind of feeling from Leonard. There's not a lot of, I am the powerful red dragon in this character. He seems very troubled. He seems very lonely. He seems very pathetic. There's a lot of patheticness, and I really do champion a movie and applaud a movie that doesn't fall into the normal thing of the serial killer that can do no wrong, that is super powerful. You feel that this person is on the verge of suicide the entire time, and Clara senses that. And she realizes that there's something not only just fetishistic, but powerful about the scrapbook. And she cleverly starts to use the scrapbook to keep herself alive and to use against Leonard. What is interesting about this movie is that the screenwriter is Tommy Biondo, and he also plays Leonard, the serial killer. And Eric Stanze certainly is the director of this movie, but he allows Biondo and Emily Hack, who plays Clara. Emily Hack really gives a hell of a performance here because she has to deal with all the stuff that's going on. There had to be major consent and agreements for this movie to work. And there are moments in this movie that are so intense because Tommy Biondo is so deeply imbued in this character that there are moments where both Emily Hack and Biondo are no longer seemingly acting. That's a lot to ask of from a shot-on-video movie. Something that is normally considered a throwaway art form, something that is lowest common denominator. To be able to have moments of true anarchic cinema, something that feels so real that you start to look away from the screen. There's some power in that. It's not for everyone. I will say that Scrapbook is notable and a touchstone in shot-on-video filmmaking because of the power and energy that it has. So that's Eric Stanze. And now, I'm talking about how there's this thing of doing something transgressive that it doesn't get seen every day, that you want to try and do something new with these films. And so I'm going to go in that direction now, big time. And we're going to get out of the United States for a moment. We're going to go to Munich, Germany. And we're going to talk about The Burning Moon from 1992, a notorious SOV, one of the legendary SOVs by Olaf Ittenbach. Now, Olaf has made quite a few movies of his own, mostly shot on video, mostly very low budget. But he started as a makeup effects artist, and he's done makeup effects in many films. And so when he finally decided to be a director, he already had a big bag of tricks that he was able to bring to his movie. And so The Burning Moon is essentially a two-part movie. It has a wraparound, but there are two stories that are in there. And the wraparound is this thoroughly unlikable teenage boy, this tough kid, this gang kind of guy, who is really kind of a little pissant. We get to watch him blow a job interview, which was obviously handed to him on a silver platter, probably from the family, a family friend. And he's just an asshole. He tells the guy to fuck off and smokes in his office and all this stuff just to get kicked out so that he can hang out with his friends. And then he goes home and he gets into trouble with his family, and his dad, pretty much beats the crap out of him for trying to be a tough guy to his mom. And he's forced to stay at home while they go out, and he's going to babysit his younger sister. And that's where our story comes in. He's going to read, this fucking freaky, terrible boy is going to sit on the bed of this little girl and read her 2 bedtime stories. And we assume he's making them up as he's going. And one is about a serial killer, a girl who picks up a serial killer for a blind date, and things go really, really bad. And then the second one is about a village where people are being raped and killed, and the person who's doing it is the priest. I'm not giving anything away. It's pretty much from the first moment of that story, you know what is actually happening and who's actually doing it. What makes this movie really interesting is the craziness of the violence that's in here. So the first episode with the serial killer, he goes on a spree just to get to this girl, to find her in her house when she runs essentially from him when she realizes who he is. We see him breaking out of a mental institution, stealing a car by running a guy over, and there's some great stunts. In fact, I think Olaf Ittenbach did all of the stunts because he didn't have anybody who would want to do it. Nobody had the guts to do these things. So any kind of car accidents and stuff like that, Olaf is doing that himself. So there are some really disturbing deaths that are in this movie, and one of the first ones is in that early sequence in the serial killer portion. There is a scene with someone trapped inside of a bathroom, and the stuff that happens inside of that bathroom is pretty disturbing. It's one of the best bathroom attacks I've seen since Inside, if you remember the movie Inside, and I'm sure you do. The second movie, though, this is where it is low-budget filmmaking at its finest. The ideas that have been around with us since Kroger Bab is that give something really potent in the beginning, make people's hair curl in the beginning, and then take your time. Do a little bit of bloodletting here, do a little bit of nudity here, do a little bit of crazy violence there, do that, and then the last reel, spend all your money. Last reel, just let everything go absolutely insane. And that is Olaf Ittenbach's The Burning Moon. There are some effects in here that made me, cringe. There's, oh man, I'll just say one, which is drilling through a guy's teeth. His mouth is clenched, but they decide, well, we're going to get into that fucking throat anyway, and they just drill right through his front teeth, and you're watching it right in front of you. Oh man, it's really nasty. That is small potatoes, though, compared to some of the effects. And there's one effect in particular that is pretty much the showstopper, right? That's the part that he thought of probably first. I always like to think about these movies, too. What is the first scene that everybody thought of? That they go, I'm going to make a movie, and this scene needs to be in it. And now I have to build an entire movie around this scene. This scene has to be there. How do we get to that scene? And where do we go to get out of that scene? And I think sometimes that would be a very interesting conversation to have. I think with Olaf Ittenbach in The Burning Moon, I think I know exactly what scene. He said, I'm making this movie. And from here on, we're going to go and go wherever we can. So if you're looking for the outrageousness that there is in SOVs, I will say that any of the Olaf Ittenbachs will do. But The Burning Moon's a good starter. So I know a lot of people don't like the idea of the auteur theory. I think of it as just the author, that there's something that the people who are making movies tend to go to certain themes. They like certain camera angles. They may like certain characters. And they have certain themes that they go back to again and again. It's nothing more mystical than that. Now, I will say that maybe in Hollywood films, it's harder to attain that. But I think in the SOV world, I think there are a lot of auteurs. And, I don't want to say whether it means that you have to have a quality film or not. But I think that we see some pretty personal filmmaking at this level. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be heartfelt. It's just sometimes your id just spills out of the frame all over the movies, right? I kind of have these moments when I find a filmmaker or a set of filmmakers that just kind of blow my mind. And I just had my head handed to me by the Polonia brothers. Now, these are two brothers and filmmakers, Mark Polonia and John Polonia. Sadly, John Polonia died at the age of 39 back in 2008, but Mark continued to make these movies. They are twins, and they are gangly guys, and they're guys from Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. Now, I'm originally from northeastern Pennsylvania. I know where Wellsboro is. Wellsboro is farm country, way up there at the very top of the thing that is most known for is the Wellsboro Diner, which is a really nice diner that is from the old days. But these two guys, these two brothers, got together with a friend, and they made these movies that are absolutely insane. These are movies that really go deep into like crazy, emotional, psychosexual shit that you're not expecting. This is, you look at these two guys and you go, these are farm boys, and these are people that I know. And when I'm watching, and maybe that's why the Polonia brothers movies have such an effect on me. I know those tar paper houses. I know those kind of barns. I know the mindset, the kind of loud arrogance that comes out of like proud laziness from some people. It's a very interesting thing. And I think all places, like talking about the Long Island accents in Weasels Rip My Flesh, there is this flavoring that really comes through in some people's films. And I will say that the Polonia brothers, I have a pair of movies that I'm going to talk about because both of these movies made my jaw drop. And it doesn't happen a lot. So the first movie I want to talk about is Hallucinations. Now, Hallucinations is just three people. And I can't believe how much they get out of three people, three teenagers. It's John Polonia, Mark Polonia, and Todd Michael Smith, who's a close friend of the family, a close friend of the kids. And they're all, I believe, 18 when they're making this film. They're young and gangly and all this stuff. And essentially the movie is, I guess, a teenage Skinamarink in a way. This is the first Skinamarink. The movie essentially is three people in a house. It's three brothers. I'm not sure if one is adopted. Todd Michael Smith is going to play a character who's adopted. One of them, I think, is mentally slow, and one of them is just your regular teen who's irritated by both the other guys. Now, this is where it has a very, very much a flavoring of a type of person that doesn't normally get seen in films. I think that there's one of the cool things about SOV is that it brings focus and light to certain types of living that are out there. And this feels very authentic in many ways. It's farm living. Where they are is rural, not quite suburb, not quite city, not quite farmland, but they might have a farm attached to the house. It's a very, I won't say that it's only specific to something like Pennsylvania or the East Coast or even the Midwest, but I know that there's a flavor to it that feels very authentic for the places that I know. And so this is the kind of place where one of the family members is not related in any way. They've just kind of subsumed into the family. They've been abandoned by other family members, and the family next door brings that person into their house. That happens a lot. One of the things that really hit me that felt very authentic was the bedroom, where one of them's sleeping on the floor. And the other one, there are two beds in a room that's only made for one. And so there's a closet that's not being used because the bed is up against it. I've been there, I've been to that house. And so we have this movie where these three boys are in this house and they're just waiting for mom to come home from work. And it's never explained, but suddenly they start having hallucinations. And the hallucinations start with it being with just one of the brothers who has a cat, and he's sure that he killed the cat, and he has a hallucination that he's covered in blood and that he attacked the cat with a chainsaw. And so the other two go down in the basement to find it, and one of them goes down alone and he sees a chainsaw covered with blood, but there's no cat around. And then the other one goes down there and there is no chainsaw. And so is he egging the other one on? What's happening? There's a little bit of argument. These guys argue all the time. And then it starts getting weirder. The hallucinations start getting heavier. Things start happening that you just never see in a Hollywood film, to say the least, and you may not see in any other film. And only because they have total freedom and total naivete in a way. They don't know that they're not supposed to be doing this. They're just making this film in their house. They're breaking all sorts of taboos. And it's kind of astonishing. I was gobsmacked. I was like, okay, they're 18-year-old boys. If there's any kind of weirdness that's going to happen, it's going to be stuff that's going to be somewhat like really heteronormative. It's going to be something that is going to be kind of machismo, where you're going to have a violence, but it's going to be somewhat masculine in its violence and stuff. This movie does not go there. This movie goes in a very unexpected place. And it is disturbing. I mean, Freud would have a field day with this movie in some of the things that they decide to do. I mean, there's a penis-shaped, beast, worm, something that is in the shower. And when one of the boys goes into the shower, it's right in there, really kind of messing with him. And that's nothing compared to the one showstopper, the showstopper for me, that when I saw it, I said, is this really happening? And yes, it was really happening. What I think is great about this movie is that not only is it transgressive, it's transgressive in like almost this innocent way. There's no underlining it. It's just happening. And the naturalism of the acting is, quite a bit. But I'm really stunned with some of the choices that are made. There are things where they're able to really get across the feeling of a nightmare, the idea of actually being scared instead of being movie scared. And there's an interesting moral at the end. There's this weird thing that happens towards the end of the movie that takes it in a direction that wasn't necessarily where I thought it was going to go. It's really kind of an astonishing film. It's only an hour long, and in that hour, we get a whole bunch of stuff that happens, and yet I don't think it should have been any longer. I think that hour is exactly where it was supposed to be. And I will say the Polonia brothers blew my mind with Hallucinations. Little did I know that I was going to get my mind blown even more with the next film. The second Polonia Brothers film I wanted to talk about is the one that is marked, at least online, as being their first commercial release. That's commercial. You're using that word very loosely when you're talking about this film, Splatter Farm, from 1987. And this, once again, 3 main characters, but there is also another actress that is involved in the film. This story, another simple story, 2 young twins are sent to spend time at their aunt's farm. We're not necessarily sure what. I think it's summer vacation, and they're driving to get there, and the brothers have rivalries with each other. They're that kind of close where you irritate each other an awful lot. And so they're on their way to see their aunt, and little do they know, we kind of know because we've seen the beginning of the movie, that they have a handyman at this farm that is just a fucking sadist psycho killer. And he's out of his mind, and he's Ed Geining it all over the place, right? He dismembers people, he stores them, he goes out in the woods and he sees people who are just camping and they haven't done anything, and he just stabs them and takes their heads and keeps them in bags, and he's doing all this crazy stuff. Now, the thing that cracks me up is I love that the Polonia brothers have an understanding of showmanship. So in the very beginning of the movie comes the blurb that says, this actually happened. This is a true story, and it's based on these tragic events. And they go on this whole little thing about how real this is. And let me tell you, Wellsboro, if Wellsboro had one person murdered by some crazy person, it would be big news. If anybody did anywhere in the country the things that are in this movie, one single person did the amount of carnage that is in this film, it would be as big as Ed Gein. There would be national knowledge by the weirdos and creeps like me. We would just know about this guy. It would be infamous. It would be very hard for them to hide that in the Amish Times or something. And so I laughed out loud when I saw that. I said, I know where this movie's going already. This is going to be over the top. And it is over the top. This is a movie that really made me shocked at where the Polonia brothers would go. I realized that they were very courageous. They're unafraid to go anywhere that they want to go. They're really they're unafraid to be as gross as they want to be. And I'm not going to say that there's a maturity to this. They're talking about things that you would talk about maybe around over a beer as a kid, a stolen beer from your uncle. And you might say some really gross stuff, but to act them out, to actually put them on celluloid, and to have you as the actor going through those things, I was really impressed. So there's stuff in this movie. There's necrophilia. There's elderly lust, I guess it would be said. You find out that the aunt is really lonely. And the aunt is in her 60s or 70s, and these kids are 18. So right there, you get one of the big creep factors that there are in Splatter Farm. But the thing is, the real sadist is this handyman. And there are a couple scenes of violence and cruelty and just sexual assault and perversion and rape. There's some really, really uncomfortable stuff. And it's the uncomfortable that you don't expect. I mean, there's uncomfortable you'll see in these kind of movies all the time. And once again, it's heteronormative, right? It's you straight white 18-year-old boys are going to eat this up kind of stuff. That one-sided thing. Well, no, the Polonia brothers don't give a shit. They want to make you upset. They want to unsettle you. They want to surprise you. And I give them a lot of credit for that. They're for the small budget that's in this film, there is some really disturbing stuff. And I raise my hat and tip my hat, that is, to anybody who can get me like that, can really rattle my cage. And this is a movie from 1987, shot on video. And Mark Polonia is still going. Yeah, he's in his, I think, his early 40s or late 30s now, and they're still making movies under his own banner. So there you go, Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. And all of the flavoring, the mannerisms of these guys, the way the houses look, the barns, the attitudes, the logic, it all feels very much homegrown, because I know that part of the country. And I love that. I love that there are all of these movies, and why I'm saying the locations of where these movies were made and how much they're made for is hopefully this might inspire somebody to start their own band. So from Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, we end up going to Gainesville, Florida. We're going to look at Twisted Issues, written and directed by Charles Pinion. And I've mentioned that I believe that SOV films are like the missing link of how horror is the punk rock of cinema. Well, it can't be any closer to that than this film. So Charles Pinion was a skateboard punk and a punk rocker, had his own band, and there were multiple bands that are in this film. This was originally supposed to be a video that was a documentary about the Gainesville, Florida punk scene and the skateboard culture. And as sometimes happens when you get a lot of creative people together, it starts getting funny. And then everybody starts to show off a little bit. And the next thing you know, instead of being natural and doing a documentary, everybody just starts to decide to play little parts. And in that time period of the time that it was started out as a documentary till it ended up being a loose narrative, shot on video horror film, the people who were involved, I think there were 3 different writers that ended up coming on this, created this crazy movie that is still a snapshot of the Gainesville, Florida punk scene circa 1988. And I think Steven Anzac and Charles Pinion wrote it, and Anzac is a punk rocker. And the effects were done, I'm trying to remember who did the effects. I'm forgetting at this point. You can look it up, though, if you really like the idea of what Charles Pinion's doing here. But the idea is really simple. But what's great about it is that this is really a very punk film. This is very much like what you see in the 90s from Nick Zedd and Amos Poe and Richard Kern. You know, there's a certain feel to those, an aggro feel, a strange feel, a humorous feel. There's a very strange sense of humor that runs through those films, and that also flows very freely in Twisted Issues. So really, it's a movie about a skateboarding teen's murder from a bunch of, they're supposed to look like metalheads, I guess, or old-time rockers, who see this martial arts student skateboarder who is like Kane from Kung Fu. He's trying to be as peaceful as Sensei tells him to be. So he's never supposed to use his martial arts in offense, only in defense. And his friend is like, what do you mean? You mean if somebody poured beer on your head, you wouldn't do anything? He goes, huh. What if they grabbed your skateboard and threw it really far away? And what would you do then? And he's like, huh. And he's like thinking about it. So, of course, that exact thing happens in this movie. And he decides he's going to fight back after they headlock him and all this stuff. He gives a good scissor kick and knocks this guy on his ass and starts punching him in the face and smacks his teeth, and he's bloody. And then his friends come over and they start beating him up and they throw his board away. And then someone finally decides they're just going to run him over. So they run him over and kill him. And they take his body with them, and they decide they're going to throw it out in a certain area, where, of course, he's picked up by mad scientists who are just looking for a body to be able to bring back to life. and they deform this guy, and they do all of this stuff, and he ends up going on a craze thing and decides to kill them, the scientists, and then move on. All the way through this is a very tongue-in-cheek kind of joke about the culture itself and about technology and about nostalgia. There are a lot of really interesting attacks that are happening to culture that are in this. One of the things is that one of the main characters is constantly watching television, and as he's watching television, the story is unfolding on that, and the thing can be happening right behind him, and he doesn't care. He's watching it not live, but on TV. And there are plenty of crazy things like that end up happening. When this teenager rises from the dead, he takes a drill and he screws his board into his foot. So he's now got this attached to him as he goes on this murdering spree, getting everybody. So it's a very simple idea. What's fun about it is how well this story is told, how flavorful it is. One of the things that's really interesting is they did not have lights for shooting at night. So they're shooting inside of cars, and what Pinion's DP does has a flashlight and just swirls it very quickly around each of the person's faces. So you know what it is, and yet you're still kind of into it. You're like, that's cool. He doesn't let that stop him. And it becomes a style by the end of the movie. You're expecting that. It's no longer intrusive. And there are several different things that Pinion does like that. Some of the effects are actually really well done. And the end is really cool. There's this whole thing where the entire structure, which, I mean, started as a documentary, folks, but then this somewhat unrigid narrative spins out of control. They deconstruct the whole thing. Pinion decides to just go totally rogue in this film, and where it ends is very, very punk rock. I really like Twisted Issues, and I hope you take a chance on it. It's a crazy splatter comedy, I guess. And I will say that the humor that's in it really worked for me. Now, up to now, you've heard me talk about all of these shot-on-video films, these SOVs, and the writer-directors of them, and you've probably noticed that this is a predominantly male kind of filmmaking. There aren't a lot of women who made shot-on-video films, and it can be a little bit of a sausage factory, and so I wanted to try and find some movies that were made by women. And they are shot on video. And of course, once I started looking, they were there. And some of them are just absolutely amazing. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was telling her that I went down this dark pit of SOVs, this rabbit hole that I could not get out of. And I was mentioning that there were these movies that I was trying to find that are shot on video, that are written and directed by women. And I asked her, if she had heard of one or two of them. And one of the names, the titles that I brought up was Possibly in Michigan. And as soon as I said that, she didn't text me back. She sent me an audio message that was about 8 seconds long, and on it she just went,
"To eat it? Oh no, 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 no." Now,
I'm thinking perhaps that means that no, she doesn't know anything about Possibly in Michigan. Little did I know that that is a famous moment from Possibly in Michigan. And when I finally watched the film, I got that. And I got what is so amazing about this movie and why it is now a TikTok sensation with young women. And I think it's more than just a TikTok sensation. I think it's a big YouTube thing as well. The movie has become legendary since it came out in the early 80s, 1983. The director of Possibly Michigan is Cecilia Condit. And Cecilia has done a lot of stuff. She's a graphic artist. She's a photographer. She's an actress. She's a director. She makes a lot of art films. And this movie was a personal film for her, possibly in Michigan. The setup is essentially two women are in a shopping mall, pretty much empty shopping mall. No other people are in it, except for one person that is following them. And this is presumably a male wearing a tux and a mask. And the mask has a open mouth, like a gaping maw, a circle where the mouth should be. And the eyes just stare forward. Cecilia talked about the mask that she found. She found it in a dental school basement. So it was probably a dummy for working on dental stuff, which makes it even creepier because this mouth is open all the time. And this is in the story that we're getting in this movie, which is very artful and very surreal and very funny and very terrifying at the same time, is that this is an animal cannibal. This is a predator. This is a predator named Arthur, and he's following them. And it's told in like song and just conversation between these two women, and it's narration. And so you have these characters that are in this movie. One is named Sharon and the other is named Janice. And in the beginning of the movie, Sharon is walking through this mall, and there is this character following her, Arthur. And she says some interesting things. She says that she has always been attracted to these dangerous men. And she says they find her. Somehow these men find her. She goes, at certain points, I've had them convince me that the violence comes from me. And then she says this thing, and it's like there's a narrator, that it's no longer Sharon. There's someone who's kind of singing along this really creepy song that's talking about being eaten and this animal cannibal. And as this Casio keyboard kind of music is playing in the background, the narration says, Janice is also very similar to Sharon. They have the same kind of proclivities, so they have become friends. And at one point she says, Arthur also follows them both. The three of them have two things in common. One is violence. The other is perfume. Such a strange bit of dialogue there, such a strange phrase, and yet it becomes very interesting to the story. It becomes very unique to what this story is trying to tell. There is this stalker that is coming after these women, and they're telling stories about other moments of violence and how women hide and ignore warning signs. And if there is something that seems terribly upsetting, that is reality, you just deny reality. So the way that no comes in is they're smelling this perfume, and one woman says, this smells like my crazy aunt, my mother's sister, who, when her poodle was wet, put the poodle in the microwave. And the other one says, to eat it? It was, to eat it? Yes, to eat it. No. And they go,
oh no. No, 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 no.
As if maybe that's what was happening. And instead they said, no, silly, to dry it. So it's almost like that is the answer that feels a little bit more safe, and that they're sing-songing, getting rid of the truth. So it's very interesting the way this movie dances with you. Now, I'm not going to say much more about it. It's very short. It's only, I believe, 11 or 12 minutes long. But what makes this really scary is knowing a little bit of the backstory. At the time that Cecilia Conant was making this movie, she was making several shorts at the same time. And they're kind of a set piece together. And that brings me to the second film that Cecilia has done, called Beneath the Skin. Now, Beneath the Skin came before Possibly in Michigan. And it informs Possibly in Michigan. And it makes possibly in Michigan, even scarier. And so how does it do that? Well, we find out that Cecilia Condit dated an actual killer. I'm not sure if we can call him serial killer. I don't know how many people he murdered, but I think the number might be 6, because there is an intonation at one point possibly in Michigan, where she is talked to by the Prince Charming, the scary Prince Charming, who has many masks and becomes a handsome man who has a certain weird bend to him to become this Prince Charming. And at one point she says, how many were there? And he says 6, and you would be 7. So we're getting these little hints, perhaps. Cecilia is making these films, of course, to work through this psychic nightmare that she lived with. And so she was dating for several years a man who murdered his last girlfriend. So she was dating Ira Eichhorn, who is known as the Unicorn Killer. He was an environmental activist who then murdered his ex-girlfriend. At the time, Cecilia was dating him for a couple years. And this girl, I believe her name was Holly Maddox, disappeared following a trip to collect her belongings from Einhorn. And Einhorn, I guess they had what seemed like a reasonable relationship, and Cecilia knew about it. And when this girl disappeared, it didn't seem like there was foul play. It just was as if she disappeared. And Einhorn was becoming more unstable. He was very sad. He was despondent that she was never coming back and stuff like that. It was kind of a strange thing. But what we get out of this is the body is found in the closet. And Cecilia had been in that house a couple times. She had been there for so long, he had mummified her. He had taken her head and pushed it into her body. So they weren't, when the police found the body, at first they couldn't identify who it was. And then they realized that the head was embedded in the chest, and they were able to find the dental records. Einhorn was arrested, and then he made bail, and he was swearing his innocence. He swore his innocence to Cecilia. He swore his innocence to everybody. And then he ran off. He ran off to Europe for 23 years. It took 23 years until he was extradited to the United States. And so Cecilia found out that she had been dating for many years a murderer who may have killed a few people, but he certainly killed his girlfriend while he was dating her. And to say the least, she had to work that out. And so Beneath the Skin, the second film that I want to talk about, is a very artistic film, but it is essentially her speaking to a collage of images. And some of those images are really disturbing, like a beautiful woman, and then superimposed is a mummy's face, like a mummified person from historical documents. So I forget who the photographer is, but they are acknowledged at the end. There's this whole thing of her explaining how I actually believed him. And there was a certain point where I was like, oh, I don't know what happened to that girl, because you can't believe that someone that you love would do something like that. And this is only another 11-minute piece. But in the end, the chilling thing is that she continues to have dreams. She has dreams about this girl. And then she has dreams that it's her and not this other girl. And she's in the closet. And the very matter-of-fact way that this story tells itself, with visual images that are just a little disturbing. There's something completely off about the whole thing. You're feeling a chill. There's something in that is so scary because it's not trying to really overtly scare you. And I'm watching this and I'm reminded of a song by the Golden Palominos called Victim. It was essentially a woman in the trunk of a car realizing that her life is just about over and how she just wishes she was 2 minutes later to a show or wherever she was supposed to be. And she would be hearing about another girl instead of her. And there's this whole thing, and it ends with her saying there's a shotgun to her head. And so the last thing I hear is a click. And the way that the story is told so matter-of-factly is exactly how I felt about Beneath the Skin. Putting those two together, possibly in Michigan and Beneath the Skin, you have a really terrifying 22 minutes. And it is really an amazing piece. And I can understand why young girls are just fascinated by these movies, because they're telling something very personal. That's the thing about SOV, is that when you just need to tell something, you get to do so. And so Cecilia Condit was able to finally find some peace. And I saw an interview with her where she said, oh yes, my friends say I'm a completely different person now. And they're astonished at how well I'm handling life. And hey, that's a pretty good review for a little short, low-budget movie. Sometimes the artist that's been around for a while finds another art form so they can continue to be heard. And there are so many stories of, great directors, John Ford and people like that, who revolutionized cinema. And they were unemployable by the time they got into their 50s and 60s. No one wanted to talk to them. The best that they could do was be interviewed by other directors who were up and coming or do film classes. Someone who found SOV to be able to tell one more story was Doris Wishman. So if you don't know who Doris Wishman is, I encourage you to look her up. Doris Wishman has made more films than any other female director of the sound era. She started making movies in the 50s as a hobby, and it was after the death of her husband, I think in 1958. She made a feature debut with a movie called Hideout in the Sun. And then she made a name for herself in exploitation. She started out with nudist films, nudie cuties, movies like Nude on the Moon and Blaze Starr Goes Nudist, Blaze Starr being a famous burlesque dancer at the time. And then she goes from there to just sexploitation films. She does what's known as roughies. These are movies where the softcore sex has a little bit of violence and then a lot of bit of violence in it. She's known for movies like the Chesty Morgan films, Deadly Weapons and Double Agent 73. There's a movie called Bad Girls Go to Hell, which just by that name, she should be well known. She made a bunch of films. She got a lot of respect for doing it. She had absolutely no qualms about being an exploitation filmmaker. She moved into doing porn in the 70s. She did some slasher film stuff. Well, what she actually did was one called A Night to Dismember, which had a lot of issues. It took years for her to be able to put that together because I believe there were lost reels that came into it. She did movies about transgender people back before that was even close to being talked about. Let Me Die a Woman was a semi-documentary that was done in 1971. Anyway, she is someone who was notorious and also respected. And she made just so many films. But then comes the time when you're not able to make them anymore. And she was dying of cancer in the early 2000s, and she decided she was going to make 3 films. And she was living in Coral Gables, Florida at the time. And I think she was, weirdly enough, she was like working in an adult novelty store. So she was completely out of film. But then she found out about the home video release stuff that was going on, and she decided to delve into SOV. It gave her the opportunity to be able to make 3 more movies. And one of them is Each Time I Kill. She was known for something called gutter noir, a little more pornographic, a little sexy, a little sleazier. She did sleazy noir films. And so this is a movie made in, I believe it was made in 2002, but it did not get released until later, after she had died. She died in 2002. So she was making this movie while she was dying. She was doing this in 2001. And I think one of the movies that she made was called Dildo Heaven. So that's a choice. But we're actually going to talk about Each Time I Kill, which is her return to horror in a strange supernatural movie that has a little bit of Hands of Orlok, has a little bit of Dorian Gray in it, and has a whole lot of sleaze and a lot of really fun, campy B-movie nastiness. So the story of Each Time I Kill has a wallflowery, kind of homely teenager. I believe her name was Ellie Saunders in this, played by an actress named Tiffany Peralta. It's funny, the main characters, I'm not sure how much they've worked, but all the background characters, like people like Fred Schneider from the B-52s, Linnea Quigley plays the aunt in this movie. I don't think she has one speaking part in there. I think John Waters is in there as a movie watcher in a movie theater. In the background are all these people that have been kind to Doris Wishman or have been in some of her movies. And then the main characters, though, are just new folk. And so you have this character named Ellie, and Ellie is this high school senior who gets picked on by everybody. She's got bad teeth, her hair's not good, she's got blemishes, and she's picked on by everybody. And she's walking past this house, and as many of these movies go, there's a haunted house, and this one had a demonic kid in it. It was a kid who made one of his sisters disappear just by staring evilly at her. She just poof went up in like a cloud of smoke. And inside of this house is of course cursed. So Ellie of course has to go into it at some point. And when Ellie goes inside, she finds this beautiful locket. And when she opens up the locket, it has the biggest amount of dialogue ever written on a note that tells you all about that there's a spell that's with this locket, and as long as you wear this locket, anybody that you kill, as long as you say certain magic incantations, I want this to be part of me. Whatever body part you touch, whatever you're doing to the person that you kill, you get that attribute, and they get the attribute that you're trying to get rid of. So of course, the first death is a accident. And then after that, she becomes power mad until she becomes a great vavoom sex symbol. But the deaths are absurd, and the idea is really funny. And I know what Doris was going for. I mean, Doris is talking about this idea of the beauty myth, and you can see how treacherous she finds women who are living only to have that kind of look. And so there's social satire in it. There's some straight up comedy because there's camp all over this thing. There's a weird grittiness to it. And it's really interesting to see Doris Wishman she's 88 when she's making this movie. And she's getting pretty naturalistic performances at parties and things that are happening in this movie from people who are most likely non-actors. It's a really interesting end to a long, long career. And I'm pleased that she actually put out an SOV film, that she said, fuck this, fuck getting old, fuck dying, I'm just going to make one more movie. She decides to talk about the ephemeral nature of our bodies. And I think that that's pretty cool. The last film I want to talk about, last SOV, would be another film by a woman. This woman is an actress, and she's a B-movie actress of some renown. She does 1 million SOV films. She's done over 100 movies. In fact, she's in 16 Tongues, the Scooter McCrae movie that I talked about. Her name is Tina Kraus. You may know her from these movies if you happen to be an SOV fan. Movies with names like International Necktie Strangler, The Cannibal Doctor, Psycho Sisters, Dead Student Society, Psycho Charlie Returns, Part 1, Curse of the Swamp Creature, my goodness, it just goes on and on and on. Hung Jury, Virgin Sacrifices, and the one thing that she's done a lot of is acting, but one thing that she did once was direct. And she made a doozy. In 1999, she made a movie called Limbo. And it's really interesting to see how much emotional heft there is in this film. And the things that she's been in, I mean, the duct tape killer, you're looking at a movie like that and you're going to get what you're paying for. But Limbo goes somewhere else. Limbo is like this weird, surreal movie that is, I'm not sure if it's happening in real time, if it's happening in the past, if we're looking at something from the future. I'm not sure. One thing is for sure, that there is some serious guilt being worked out in this film, and grief being worked out in this film. And the idea of it is essentially a woman at a bar takes a guy home, things get rough, she kills him, she hides this, and the guilt is going to eat her alive. The ghosts seem real. And just by chance, we might actually be in hell already. The photography is really intriguing in this. She goes experimental on many occasions. There's very little money in this film, you can tell. But what's intriguing is that hell might just be a bar in New Jersey. And I think that's kind of a funny idea, but I think it's also very telling. What we get in this movie is a kind of a list of the ways that men are frightening in bars. How hard it is to just be a woman and sit in a bar. How hard it is to be a waitress. How hard it is to just try and get some peace and quiet. And there's a predatory feel to the bar itself. And of course, the people who are talking, the things that are said are really demeaning. There are some real pricks that are working in this place, or sitting and drinking in this place. There's a disconnection of time that you feel in this. How many times are we entering this bar? How many times have we stayed here? Is this all one visit? Are we having her reminisce over different things that have happened before? Not quite sure. There's a heaviness to this film that I was not expecting. And it is not an easy movie. It does not feed you much. It lets you interpret from what you're getting out of the images. And that can be a really invigorating thing. And that's how I felt about this movie. I felt it was very invigorating. And I tried to put myself in the position of the main character, because there's only so much information given to you, so you start to really pay attention. You're really trying to figure out what's going on. But I don't know, it may not be any more understandable than a David Lynch movie would be. You either get a David Lynch movie or you don't at this point. And it may be that Tina Krause made her own version of that kind of film. It's spooky. It's sad. It definitely has a sense of aggression to it that is really unsettling at times. I highly recommend it, if you can handle it. So, it seems that me talking about Let's Get Dead, my film, I guess I'm in good company if they'll have me. The thing is that I realize that I need to be more proud of the fact that I made this film. I got my own video camera at one point when I was living in Pennsylvania, and I did some shorts there. I fell in love with the idea of the moving image, of course, but, time and circumstance change things. But it doesn't mean that you have to stop. Just because you can't play arpeggios on your guitar doesn't mean that you can't be a musician. That was the great thing about punk rock, is that it said, if you want to get up on the stage, you can. We're not going to put any barriers up. And SOV allowed me to be able to say my piece. I should have kept up with it. It would have been fun to see where it would go. But the people who are truly into it, the people who truly love doing it, the Polonia brothers and their ilk, all those folks deserve to be seen. And I hope you do take a look for them. I guess I'll finish with a quote that came from Henry Rollins from the documentary Punk Attitude that was directed by Don Letts. All you need is one guy or girl to stand up and say, fuck this. And everyone goes, voice of a generation, thank you. I've been thinking that, but I've never had the guts to stand up and say it. And all of a sudden, fuck this has a backbeat? Well, hey, that I think is the kind of rebellion that I'm looking for in horror. What is horror rebelling from? What do you got? Take a chance on some of those SOV films that are out there. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.